In this lesson, we're going to take a look at some advanced options for determining how layers interact with each other. Let's go again to our Chapter 5 folder and open the file titled Blend Options. Now this composite should look familiar. We created this in the last chapter. We've got our car layer. We've got two adjustment layers that I've got hidden right now and a bottom sky layer. So the car is silhouetted nicely against this sky. And here's what we can do with blending options. Right now the car is showing through completely over top of the sky. Now of course we could change opacity, but that will change the opacity of everything, and we can see some clouds bleeding through, and that can be an interesting effect, but we're going to go for something a little bit different. I'm going to double click on this car layer, and that brings up our layer style dialog box. Now our blend mode is set to normal. That's fine. Our opacity is at 100%. What we're interested in is way down here at the bottom, these blend if sliders. Now this is something that people don't really use too often. It's not very discoverable, and it's not a very intuitive tool here, but here's the way it works. We've got two layers. They're calling it this layer and the underlying layer. We think of this as our top layer. This is the car layer here, and this is the sky layer. Now when the blend mode is set to normal, pixels from the top layer dominate those of the bottom layer. With these blend if sliders, we get to determine whether things can peek through or not based on their brightness. Now we're going to set this blend if option to gray. You can work with individual channels here, but in this instance we want to work with gray, which doesn't mean a grayscale color. It simply means a composite of the red, green, and blue channels. So what we want to do is move these sliders. Now this layer, this is the top layer for the car. Let me show you what happens if we drag this. We've got a range from 0 to 255, with 0 being shadows and 255 being our highlights. If we click and drag this slider, look at what's happening to the image. We're telling Photoshop to look in this car layer for any pixels that are darker than a value of 9, anything from 0 to 8, and those pixels should become transparent and let the bottom layer show through. So you can see that the darkest areas of the car, I'll slide this back for 1 second, are that grille in the front and the tires, and you can see those are becoming transparent so the bottom layer can show through. Now the same thing would happen if we drag this highlight slider here. If we drag it far enough, you can see the highlights on the car start to become transparent. So in this case, we're telling Photoshop to look for pixels brighter than a value of 194, and once it finds those, to let those become transparent. Now I'll set this back here, because for this image it's going to work really nicely if we adjust not the car layer but the sky layer. So we're going to go to this underlying layer here. So far all we've done is to click and drag on these sliders, but if we hold down the Alt key on Windows or the Option key on a Mac while we click, we can split this slider, and this is really where you're going to have the most creative use for this, because watch what happens as I split these. Notice that now I'm getting some clouds peeking through the car, almost like reflections. We can see it happening nicely up in the window at the top, and it's also coming in nicely across the bumper and the front of the car. So we can drag this right about here. We don't want to go too far and overdo it, but we want to just have some reflections of the clouds in this car. Now what we've done is chosen a partial selection. We've told Photoshop to look for pixels in the sky layer between a level of 212 and 255 and make them partially visible. So the brighter a pixel is, the more visible it will become. This is a great way to get very photorealistic results. So again, you hold down the Alt key while you click on these sliders. If you're on a Mac, you hold down the Option key, and that splits these sliders and gives you this subtle, partially visible range of pixels. I'm going to click OK. Now as it is, this isn't very realistic. We wouldn't really be seeing reflections through the grille of the car unless the grille was made of glass, I guess. But there's an easy way to fix this. I've got two adjustment layers here, and what I want to do for just a moment is turn off this top layer. You can see there's this region of clouds that are appearing through the car, and we don't want them to. Now they're appearing because the blend if sliders are set to look for a particular level of brightness to allow those to show through the top layer? Well, with an adjustment layer, we can easily adjust the brightness of pixels. So I'll turn this car layer back on, and our darken clouds adjustment layer, I'm going to click and turn on the visibility here, and those clouds have disappeared, and I'll show you why. What we've done in this adjustment layer is simply make a curve that darkens the highlights. And what highlights did they darken? Well, if we toggle off this car layer, you can see that we've darkened these highlights in the cloud area. Again, it's an adjustment layer, so we're not permanently altering the pixels, but we've darkened them enough so that they fall below our threshold for transparency, thereby blocking them, and we still have the car showing through here, but we've got clouds over here, and we've got clouds over here. Well, if we've got clouds along this bumper, it'd be nice to have at least a few peeking through here, and that's where our second adjustment layer comes in handy. I'll show you this in the Curves Adjustment panel. We have done the opposite. We have taken tones and brightened them. And watch what happens if I turn the visibility on. Now we see clouds peeking through inside here. Let's turn off the car layer so we can see what happened. Here's with that layer off and on. So we've darkened the clouds over here to keep them from showing through the car, but we have lightened the clouds right over here, made them much brighter so that they do show through. And here's the grand effect that we have. So the advanced blending options really give you a phenomenal amount of control when you've got two image layers and you're trying to blend them seamlessly.